Hi, so this is the second part of a two-part series of tutorials on exporting 3D geometry from SketchUp or Rhino and then importing that geometry into View. So the first video I talked about using the plugin in SketchUp, kind of organization of geometry, keeping it clean, making sure things are in groups or components, and making sure you have consistent application of materials to various surfaces that you're going to be using in Vue to either populate with ecosystems or just to replace with more detailed materials. And the same goes for Rhino. Make sure you apply materials to the surfaces, group things as you wish, name things. Also in SketchUp, go into the entity info or the properties in Rhino and just add a name. So it just makes it a little easier to keep track of things once you bring it into Vue. And we'll take a look at the world browser in a second. Okay, so I think we'll start with a SketchUp model, and because SketchUp has a plugin, it's actually going to export geometry, materials, and what's called a Python script. And that Python script tells Vue how to import all that information and keep it organized in Vue's native format. So we start that process by going and creating a new empty document. So I just went to File, New. I just chose spectral sunshine and the default spectral atmosphere. And we'll get more into atmospheres as we move through the next few weeks. So we've got a basic empty document. We're going to go to the automation menu and choose Run Python Script. So here's one of the ones I'd already exported, SketchUp and Rhino files. Now what you'll find is in this file, we'll create a VOB file, which has the geometry, but it will create a folder with the exact same name. And inside of that, you can't see it here because the dialog box is looking for Python script files, but all the materials are actually in here as well. So you want to make sure that you kind of keep these exports organized into bigger, higher level folders, because inside each one, this name tells you which model this is for, because the .py script always is called load scene, so you won't really know from that. So I'm going to click open. And we're going to wait a few minutes. And if you notice either, okay, right there, our SU import. And again, as I mentioned in the first tutorial, you notice in this case, I didn't have the view set down at an eye level. So it came in at a bird's eye view. One of the things about Vue is that, we have this camera object, so we can actually tilt that around. I can come over here in this view and pull that up more level. I can grab the blue axis and slide that down. So I'm going right through that person there. So I know I'm right about at eye level. And then I can always come over into this window, grab that camera and kind of zoom in on it if I want to get a little bit more of an eye level view. Now, also notice that as I'm moving, I'm getting kind of some flashing overlapping surfaces here. And that's because every blank new document comes with a default surface called ground. And in this case, since I already have a surface that represents the ground of my design, I don't really need this. So the first thing I'm going to do is select that, and you can hit the delete key or just right click and choose delete. So now you can see that I don't have all that interacting surfaces going on there, which makes it a little easier to see. You also notice that I've got a lighting going on here with the sun, and probably if I move over here and zoom out a little bit, yeah, you can see that there's the sun light source up in the sky. I can pull it up a little higher and you'll see it's changing the lighting. So I've got a little shading on this side. And if I want, you'll see there's a preview happening here. This is preview in the main camera view. And that's this camera that you can see on the screen right here. And a little later, we're going to make a couple other camera views, and you can keep multiple cameras and switch from one to the other very quickly. I'm not going to get into all the details of that, but I'll show you how to do it in this tutorial. If you want to see a little bit better preview, we activate the main camera view, right click, choose final on this little camera icon, and you'll see left click is quick render, right click is open the option. So I'm going to left click now, and you'll see it's going to go through and give me a little higher rendering. I can check auto exposure, want to leave natural film exposure on, click OK, and that gives me a little more highly rendered preview. It's still not very high resolution because it's a small window, but at least gives me a better idea. But you'll get very good at looking at this preview window and kind of understanding if the changes you're making are looking right before you have to actually do a full render. Okay, so now that we've got that in there, one of the things I want to show you, we've got the first camera set up. Also, if you want to manipulate the camera, you can select it and come over here, and this icon, you just click and move around, that kind of pivots it back and forth. This tilts it up and down. So this is like tilting, moving the camera itself up and down. If I select an object out here in the window, let's say Mr. Oles, well, let's say this building here. Okay, so this is one of the things I want to talk about. I click on this to select the building and I get the whole thing. That's because once you bring this geometry in, even though over here in the world browser on the right, if I open this up, you can see these individual pieces are in here. It's all grouped together right now, and it sits in a group. Now, depending on how complex your model is, you may want to leave it grouped together. You can still select things over here. I like to actually go over, in this case, select it, right click, choose ungroup objects. So at least at that first level, now I can select all these things. Again, it's a simple model, so it's not very hard to keep organized and to see what's there. If you have a big model with, an urban design with 100 buildings, you might want to keep those modeled. And again, it works okay if you have them all named properly, because then you can open this list up and you know what it is and you can select what you want to operate on. If you don't have them named, or it's just too many to name, then it may be easier to ungroup them, because then you can just actually physically click on it in the window and select what you want to operate on. So that's kind of, it's a trade-off one way or the other as to whether you leave things grouped or ungroup them. In this case, I'm going to ungroup. And when I click on this surface, it's basically everything else. We'll come back to this in a second, but basically I can look at my object properties, and this is the material. So this is the SU geometry, because it wasn't a group, so it just came through with this default name, SU SketchUp geometry. But it has multiple surfaces. It's got the grass surface, it's got this little ground cover circle here, and it's got a back surface, which is represented by the default gray, which is what you see right here. So you can see this is surface or material 1 of 3. If I click on these arrows, there's the ground cover on the little circle, and there's a lawn texture. So I can manipulate those, and we'll come back and operate on these a little bit later, see how that works. So for now, we're going to leave it set right there. And once we've got this ungrouped, we've got our camera where we want it. I was talking about that. Now, if you select this building, now the camera is actually pivoting around that building. So if you don't have anything selected, the camera rotation is simply you're rotating the camera that you see here represented by an icon. If you select an object, then it will actually rotate around that object, which gives you some options for how you interact with the camera. Okay, so now that we have this set, you can see the import process is really pretty straightforward. The cameras here, Sun, Steve Oles, building 1, and if you click on anything in here, you can see group. I open this up, there's a whole bunch of these windows in here. So that's what's included inside this group here. And this group has a swimming pool, and I think that's the bottom of the swimming pool, the bottom surface of it. So again, I didn't name this. If you wanted to rename this, I could right click, choose rename, come over here, call that water feature, click OK, and now I've got that renamed. So you can still, after you've imported this information, you can come over here and change the names, and I'm going to come back and take a look at layers, because right now we've got one single layer, and as I mentioned in the first tutorial, it doesn't matter if you put layers in SketchUp or Rhino anyway, it ignores those. It just looks at groups and components. Okay, so let's take a look at how we can start adding some things to this. And each of these things that I'm going to add right now, we're going to come back and spend more time on, but I just want to let you see how you can do this pretty quickly. So let's start by just adding some plants in. And these icons over here are basic elements. We've got some primitives, and again, we have the triangle. It means you click and hold, that's a fly out menu. If you see a dot, that means if you left click, it'll put the last plant that you used in. If you right click, which I'm going to do now, it pulls up the plant library that you can browse through, and that there's tabs across the top for the different categories. And then within a category, you've got these little dots, basically pages of trees. So I'm going to come across here to my summer cherry tree. If you hover, it'll give you this a little more information about the tree, how many polygons, what it is. I'm just going to click on it, and you'll see that drop that tree right in the center of my scene. Now, it's not too bad a size there, but it's maybe a little big. Pull it up here in front of Steve. So if I want to make that a little bit smaller, again, right-clicking on the mouse gives me the pan tool. Using the wheel on the mouse gives me the zoom. And if you want more control of the zoom, you hold the control key down while you zoom, and it gives you smaller increments. So right-click is pan, scroll is zoom. So this little thing here we'll talk more about as time goes on, but it's called the gizmo, and right now it's set in the move mode. So I can rotate with it, I can scale with it from here side to side, but if you're scaling something like a tree, you're better to switch to the scaling setting of the gizmo, because then I can shrink it down. You'll notice that it's scaling around the center point, which is exactly what you want for a tree. You don't really want it scaling side to side, because after you've placed it, that's going to change the location of the center point. And we want it to stay where it is, just get a little different size. If I go back to move, select, deselect, you can see now it's placed that tree in the view. If I do a quick preview, I won't change the settings, so I'm just going to hit enter, close that. You can see it's adding shading to the building based on the sun angle, and has some nice realistic textures and leaf patterns. So now if I go back to my tree and I just right click, it's going to put another one of those trees in, but what you'll notice is it's actually different than the other one. It's not exactly the same. So I'm going to put one over there. View generates a new version of each tree as it places it. So I'm kind of moving it in plan, but I'm also looking at it in my perspective view, at least if I was just doing a little vignette and trying to compose this. Okay, so there we go. I've placed 3 trees in there. Each one's a little different, scaled and rotated. And again, do a quick rendering. Starting to take shape. So now let's add a few more shrubs in there, give it some other scale. So I'm going to right click, go to my shrubs tab, pick the summer bush. And again, it looks a little bit large to me, so I'm going to scale it down. And then go back to move. I move this in over here in front of the building. And now once I have this, I could keep placing them, but I can also use the move. You'll notice when I move over that square, that's when I've got the move. I hold the Alt key down, it just lets me drag off a copy, and then I could rotate that around, drag another copy, rotate. So get the Alt key down first, drag another copy. I'm just rotating a bit each time. Since I'm copying the exact same plant, I don't want them to have the same orientation. You could scale it a little bit. Doesn't have to be much, especially since this is kind of more in the background anyway, but okay, so a couple more of those. And now you'll see that those are all kind of stacking up over here. We've got a couple of cherry trees. We've got all these summer bushes, but we can click on one, hold the shift key down, click on this, and then come over here and grab them and say, let's push them down a little bit so they've got really long stems before the leaves start. So there we go. Just push them down into the ground a little bit. We've got some texture for the shrubs going on there. So while we're at it, since I have these selected, I'm going to right click. I'm just going to say group objects, rename, call that shrubs. Select those, group them, rename. Okay. So you can keep yourself organized as you go along, and now we've got these on in different groups, which makes them very easy to select if we wanted to operate on them all at the same time. And if I want to add another layer, I just come over here to the world browser and click on the new layer icon. I'm going to rename that layer and call it plants. And then to move these into that layer, shift select them, drag till you see that line, and now it drops them in there. So if I click on this little icon and deselect them, you'll see that they disappeared from there. So that whole layer is just this little icon with the eyeball turns them off and on. So that's really nice. And you can also right click on this and or select the objects in it, and if they're turned off, it keeps them from rendering. So I think that's the case here. Off there, we render. Okay, so in this case, it doesn't keep them from rendering. But if we go in and actually select these, you can select that group and choose hide from render. So now when I come back in, it's going to render the scene and those trees are not going to be there. So if you added them in and then you realize, well, I need to work on some building details and I don't want to wait for the render to do all the detail in the vegetation, you can just change that at the group level. Okay, so that's how you set up a new layer. That's how you add some trees and shrubs in there. If I wanted to add a primitive, let's just add, I'm going to add a rectangular surface in here. And I'm going to go to this view. Okay, just create a little platform there. Now in that case, when I select that platform, you'll see that it over here in the object properties, it pulls up a blank material or a default material. If I double click on that, it will give me the basic material editor. And I don't know if it opens with advanced, you just click on basic and it will give you the basic material editor. Click on advanced, you get this material. So, you know, I can go on in here and just double click on that icon and I get the same kind of window to browse libraries, and I'm at basic tiles. Let's just pick one of these tile patterns, tile 1, and you'll see we'll get into this soon. It's a combination of two materials with a map that determines how those materials are distributed. So I'm just going to click OK for now. And you'll see that that has that new material applied to it. So sometimes we'll bring things in with more neutral colors or materials and we'll replace them with new ones. Sometimes you could just use materials that come from Rhino or SketchUp. But what we'll probably do is change things like bump maps or displacement maps or transparency maps to affect the way they appear in the rendering, even though the basic material may stay the same. So if we select one of these buildings, for example, there's two textures here. If I double click, this is the siding. So if I go to my basic material editor, you see it's this color map, which gives you the image of the siding, a bump map, which makes it appear that the siding is kind of sticking out and creates a shadow line. And it gives you the same transparency map, even though the transparency is set to 0. In this case, you don't really need a transparency map because you don't want your siding to become invisible. But as long as it's set to 0, it won't do anything. But if you uncheck it, then it doesn't even need to process it. So that's how, this is something that just came directly from SketchUp, and we'll get into how you change, you know, if you want the bump to be bigger or smaller, you change some of these settings or scale it up or scale it down. Although the ability to place plants in view individually or copy and paste them like you can in most 3D programs is pretty cool, especially when you place the plants individually. Each one is actually unique. But one of the most powerful features of View is the ability to go in and place ecosystems anywhere there's a particular material. So let's do that by clicking on the grass surface. And you'll notice we've got several textures here as I went over before. There's the lawn. I'm going to double click, pull up my material editor. And the next thing I'm going to do is to go up to the very top where it says Simple Material, click on that list and choose Ecosystem Particles. So I just created a new layer of material, which is also another really powerful feature. You can have multiple layers of materials on top of each other and have View decide to render certain layers at certain places. And it's just like Photoshop. Whatever's above covers up what's below. So I'm going to leave the original texture from SketchUp, add this vegetation, click on the General tab, and you'll notice some familiar icons from over here at the side, the trees, the stones, and objects. So I'm going to click on plants. I'm going to use a lawn texture that I have in a personal collection, but if you click on grasses here, you could use this patch of grass, although you probably have to scale it down a bit to make it fit very well. But I'll show you where the scale function is, and you just have to do a little trial and error adjustment. Since this fills in a little better, I'm going to pick this one, and I'm going to go to density, bump this up to maybe 75%. And here's where scaling, I think this is already scaled pretty well, but if you needed to make it a little bit smaller so it fills in a little more densely and doesn't have a big overlap, which I think you'll see on the default patch of grass. For right now, I'm going to leave this where it is. And then I just click on the populate button. Okay, so if you get a message like this, I think I set the density up a little bit too high in this case because it's got 2 million instances. So I'm going to say no and go back to my density and set it back down a little bit. And in this case, maybe I'll set that up a little bit and try it again. So there we go. That looks a little better. And you'll notice down here in the preview, it's showing something. And if I click on this, you'll see it's got some nice 3D grass. Now, it's still, let's bump this up. I'm going to double click and pull it up. You can see there's still some patches. So I don't really like that. So I am going to increase the density a little bit. Hit clear, populate. It's starting to look better. Let's clear it. There we go. So I'll click OK. Click on my render. Yeah, and the preview is OpenGL. It's not perfect, so you kind of learn to judge that preview, and then depending on your angle and your point of view, but now you can see I've actually populated that entire area with 3D grass. You can see the shadow it's creating along the edge of the swimming pool back here. It's actually coming up around this other area. You can see it has some depth there, and if I wanted to scale it up and make it a little bit longer, which I'll do just so you can see it, and it has really nice 3D quality because that's actually 3D grass growing in there. So if I come in here, scale it up a bit, and keep this minimum size variation to 0.5. Let's do another quick render. See what it looks like. So again, at this larger size, you can see the detail in the trees, the bark, the shading, the leaf shadow patterns, the reflections on the water, everything that's View is rendering from that basic, simple SketchUp model. Okay, so that's kind of filling in. Again, it's always a compromise between perfection and the time it takes to render it. And so you can see up front there's some patches, and if that foreground was completely visible and is really important, then you might want to go in and increase the density of the lawn a little bit so it fills that in. Let's switch around to the next texture. And let's do the same thing. Let's choose Ecosystem Particles, General, and let's go to our Grasses tab again. We've got some reeds in here, so I'm going to populate some reeds in that area. So again, it doesn't have to be a small ground cover. It can be any plant you want. I am going to increase the density, going to scaling, set this size variation to 0 so it's uniform, and let's just populate it. Now, again, this is one of those things where you see it doesn't look very good. So even without closing this dialog box, you can click on the render, the preview render, and you can see over here on the side, it looks actually pretty good, even though on the screen it didn't look very good. So there's the reeds, cattails. Yeah, now it's not super dense, so if that's not the look you want, if that's not the design intent there, then anytime you just hit the escape key on the render. Okay, we can go back here, double click on that as soon as we clear that. Okay, so we're back here. So we say, let's up the density and let's reduce the scale a bit so they're a little tighter. Clear it, populate it. Looks a little better. You can see it's a little denser in here. Clear, populate. Okay, we'll stop there. So as it renders, again, we can go back in and change materials on these windows, for example. One interesting thing is, again, since this model is sitting kind of by itself in an empty world in view, even though this glass probably came through with some reflectivity, it has nothing to reflect. So we could go in there and change that and make it a more realistic glass texture. However, what we really need to do is put something in the scene, because if there's nothing in the background, there's nothing to reflect off the windows. And that's kind of the case right now. We've just got an infinite space around us. But you can see how that populated that ground cover. And that's really a powerful design feature that saves you all kinds of time for modeling, because you don't have to, if you know you're going to have massings of plants, or at whatever level, trees, shrubs, herbaceous plants, lawn, ground covers, whatever it is, if you define those by different areas in SketchUp or Rhino, just like this, that split off and have a unique texture applied to it, then when you get into view, you can populate those extremely quickly with very detailed vegetation that renders really nicely. So anyway, that's just a quick overview of kind of how to import things from SketchUp into Rhino, or into View. And if we take a look at the Rhino import process, I'm not going to go through this whole population and putting plants and everything that I just did, but I will show you the only variation. If I go to New, Default, say No, then instead of using the automation, since Rhino doesn't have a View script associated with it, I go to File and Import Object. And as I mentioned in Rhino, you export this 3ds file, click OK, and you can see that it came in the same way. So I can take my camera here, move it, rotate it around, and I can come over here and back it off. I want to delete my ground, drop it down a little bit more, can zoom it in. Okay, so you can see here the textures came through from Rhino as well. This one actually, whatever, I don't have a scale figure in here, looks more reasonable. Clearly this is really big, so I can come in here. Again, it's grouped together. Now, in this case, it doesn't look, it's just this black preview, which is kind of intimidating because it doesn't look like it's correct. But in this case, if I go to the basic material editor and I go to my color map and I scale this to 0.25, 0.25, click OK, re-render this. Now you can see that that texture has been scaled down. So either you do that in Rhino or SketchUp, because it's designed for architectural units, most of the textures that are in there are the right scale. Not necessarily true in Rhino or in View if you just bring in an image map to create a material, and we'll talk about that soon. So you just have to know the scale of it and change the scale of the image map so that the texture looks the right size. Basically, this is the same process. If you want to select this, ungroup it, you can do that, and now you've got those individual pieces, and I named them in the properties in Rhino, so you see the names as well. If it doesn't have a name, just gets this, you can right click and say rename, so that you can tell what things are. Really becomes important, as I said, with a complex model, to have as many names as possible, so you can find things easily, select them, and make modifications to them. So pretty straightforward. Rhino, save out as 3D Studio file, bring it in with the import object command, and then set up the same process that I just went through with SketchUp. So hopefully that will help you as you go through this to kind of, again, the idea is you kind of go through these steps to see how it works. And over the next few weeks, we're going to look at each one starting on Monday with materials, really start looking at how you set those up, how you create them, and how they work. All right, great.